Look at a map, any map. You see lines, straight lines, curved lines, lines that follow rivers, lines that cut across deserts, lines that divide mountains in half. But here is a question. Who drew those lines? Who decided that this side is one country and that side is another? Those lines are not natural. Rivers did not draw them. Mountains did not draw them. People drew them. And when people draw lines, other people must live inside them or fight to change them. A border is just a line on a map, but for millions of people, that line decides everything. It decides what language you speak, what flag flies above your school, whether you are free or not free, whether you are safe or in danger. The story of borders is the story of the modern world. It is a story of power, identity, ambition, and belonging, and it begins long before any map was ever drawn. Hi, and welcome to Daily English Origins. Are you learning English? Great! Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started. Imagine the world 10,000 years ago. There are no countries. There are no passports. There are no borders. People move freely across the land. They follow animals. They follow rivers. They follow seasons. These early humans are called nomads. Nomads are people who move from place to place. They do not stay in one location permanently. They do not own land. The idea of my country does not exist yet. Then something changes. People learn to farm. Farming means staying in one place. It means growing food in the same soil every year. And when people stay in one place, they start to feel something new. They start to feel that this land is ours. That feeling, the feeling that a piece of land belongs to a group of people, is the very first seed of a border. The earliest borders were not lines on maps. They were walls. They were rivers. They were mountains. Nature itself was the first border maker. Think about the Nile River in Egypt. The Nile gave Egypt its shape. East of the Nile was civilization, cities, farms, temples. West of the Nile was desert. The river was a natural border between life and emptiness. Ancient China built the Great Wall. The Great Wall was not just a military structure. It was a statement. It said, inside this wall, we are Chinese. Outside this wall, you are not. The Romans built Hadrian's Wall in Britain. This wall cut across the entire island of Great Britain. It separated Roman Britain in the south from the unconquered tribes in the north. The wall said, this is where our world ends. These were physical borders. You could touch them. You could see them. They were real and solid. But later borders would become more abstract. Abstract means something that exists as an idea, not a physical thing. And abstract borders would cause the most conflict of all. Before armies and politicians decided where countries begin and end, geography, the physical features of the land, shaped human groups naturally. Mountains are natural dividers. The Pyrenees Mountains separate France and Spain. The Himalaya Mountains separate South Asia from Central Asia. When a mountain range is high enough and difficult enough to cross, people on each side develop separately. They develop different languages, different customs, different identities. Rivers also create natural borders. The Rhine River in Europe, the Rio Grande between the United States and Mexico, the Amur River between Russia and China. Rivers are easy to see. They move, they shift. And when a river shifts, a border dispute begins. A dispute is a disagreement or argument, often between countries. Oceans and seas create the clearest borders of all. Islands like Japan, Britain, and Madagascar developed in isolation. Isolation means being separated from others. This isolation shaped their cultures deeply. It made them unique. It also made them feel different from the people across the water. But geography only sets the stage. It is human ambition, the desire for power, land, and resources, that writes the real story of borders. For most of human history, the world was not organized into nations. It was organized into empires. An empire is a large territory controlled by one powerful ruler. This ruler is often called an emperor or empress. Empires do not respect the natural identities of the people they conquer. They absorb them. They erase local languages. They impose new laws, new gods, and new names. The Roman Empire stretched from Britain to Egypt to Mesopotamia. The Mongol Empire was the largest land empire in history. It covered China, Persia, Russia, and much of the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire ruled for over 600 years across 3 continents. When empires conquer a land, they do not ask the local people, "Do you want to be part of us?" They simply take. And when empires fall apart, which they always eventually do, they leave behind a broken puzzle. Different languages, religions, and ethnic groups are suddenly living inside the same borders. This is a critical point. When an empire collapses, someone must draw new lines. And the people drawing those lines often do not understand or do not care about the people who must live inside them. For a very long time, most people had no maps. Farmers knew their village. Sailors knew their coastlines. Merchants knew their trade routes. But no one had a picture of the whole world. Then came the age of cartography. Cartography is the science and art of making maps. This was a turning point in history. Suddenly, a king could look at a piece of paper and see his entire kingdom. He could see its edges. He could see where it ended and where another power began. Early maps were not accurate. They were full of mistakes. Some maps showed sea monsters in unknown oceans. Some maps placed continents in the wrong positions. But even inaccurate maps were powerful, because a map told a story. A map said, "This is the world, and this is where we fit in it." European powers in the 1400s and 1500s began exploring the world. Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands sent ships to Africa, Asia, and the Americas. When these explorers arrived in new lands, they did something remarkable. They drew those lands on maps, and then they claimed them. They claimed land that was already home to millions of people. They put their flags in the ground and said, "This belongs to us now." This process is called colonialism. Colonialism is when a powerful country takes control of another land and its people. Colonial maps would reshape the world and cause pain that lasted for centuries. If geography shapes borders naturally and maps draw them theoretically, then wars decide them brutally. Many of the world's most important borders were drawn not by geographers, but by generals and diplomats at the end of wars. A treaty is a formal agreement between countries. When a war ends, the winning side and the losing side sign a treaty. This treaty often redraws the map. The loser gives up land. The winner gains it. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 is one of the most important moments in the history of borders. This was a series of treaties that ended a long and destructive war in Europe called the 30 Years' War. But it did something even more important. It introduced the idea of the nation-state. A nation-state is the idea that a group of people with a shared identity, a shared language, culture, or history, should have their own government and their own territory. This idea seems simple today, but in 1648 it was revolutionary. Revolutionary means it completely changed the way people thought. Before Westphalia, the important political unit was the dynasty. A dynasty is a family of rulers. You belong to the Habsburg family's lands, or the Ottoman Sultan's lands. After Westphalia, the important unit became the nation. You belong to France, or England, or Spain. Your nationality began to define you. A border does two things at the same time. It keeps some people in, and it keeps other people out. But what makes a nation more than just a territory with lines around it? Nations are built on identity. Identity is the sense of who you are, your culture, your language, your shared history, your values. When people share an identity, they begin to imagine themselves as one group. The historian Benedict Anderson called this an imagined community. An imagined community is a group of people who feel connected to each other, even if they have never met, because they share the same stories, symbols, and beliefs. Think about what a nation uses to build this shared identity. A flag, a national anthem, a special song that represents the country, a national language, a national story, a history that says, this is where we came from and why we are special. These are all tools. They are tools for making people feel that they belong together. But here is the difficult truth. Not everyone inside a border shares the same identity. And some people who share an identity are separated by borders. This is the great tension at the heart of every modern nation. and it has caused some of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. In 1884, representatives from 14 European nations gathered in Berlin, Germany. They sat around a large table. On that table was a map of Africa. Over the next few months, these men divided the entire African continent among themselves. No African leaders were invited to this meeting, not one. This event is called the Berlin Conference, or the Scramble for Africa. The word scramble means to rush and compete for something in a disorganized way. European powers, Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, Portugal, and others were racing to claim African land for its resources. They drew straight lines across the map. These lines cut through mountains, rivers, and deserts. More importantly, they cut through people. They divided ethnic groups of people who share the same culture and ancestry in half. The Maasai people of East Africa were split between British and German territory. The Iwe people were split between British Gold Coast and German Togoland. The Somali people were divided among 5 different colonial powers. These borders were not drawn for African people. They were drawn against them. And when African nations gained independence in the 20th century, they inherited these artificial borders. Artificial means not natural, made by humans for a purpose that did not reflect the reality on the ground. The consequences, the long-term results of those Berlin lines are still visible today in border disputes, civil wars, and ethnic conflicts across the African continent. Africa was not alone. European colonialism reshaped borders across Asia too. In South Asia, Britain controlled a massive territory called British India. This territory included what is today India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and more. The British did not create one unified nation. They ruled through a strategy called divide and rule. Divide and rule means deliberately keeping different groups, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, in competition with each other, so they do not unite against the colonial power. When the British finally left South Asia in 1947, they left in a hurry. A British lawyer named Cyril Radcliffe was given just 5 weeks to draw the border between India and the new Muslim nation of Pakistan. 5 weeks for a border that would affect hundreds of millions of people. Radcliffe had never been to India before. He drew the line through the Punjab region and the Bengal region. These were areas where Hindu and Muslim communities lived side by side, in the same villages, on the same streets. When the line was drawn, it created one of the largest and most violent mass migrations in human history. A migration is when a large group of people move from one place to another. Approximately 14 million people crossed those new borders on foot, by train, and by cart. They were leaving everything they knew. Estimates suggest that between 200,000 and 2 million people died in the violence that followed. Whole villages were destroyed. Families were separated forever. This event is called the Partition of India. It is one of the most painful border stories in modern history. And it was created in 5 weeks by a man with a pencil and a map. If colonialism drew artificial lines across the developing world, the world wars shattered the old empires and forced Europe to redraw itself. By 1914, 4 great empires dominated the world: the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, the German Empire. These empires contained dozens of different nationalities, different languages, different religions, all held together by the authority of one central ruler. Then, on June 28, 1914, a young Bosnian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, in the city of Sarajevo. This single assassination, the murder of an important political figure, triggered a chain reaction. A chain reaction is when one event causes another, which causes another, like falling dominoes. Within weeks, Europe was at war. This became World War I, also called the Great War. It lasted 4 years and killed approximately 20 million people. When the war ended in 1918, all 4 empires had collapsed. The map of Europe and the Middle East had to be completely redrawn. At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, the victorious powers, primarily Britain, France, and the United States, sat down to create a new world order. A world order is the arrangement of power and authority among nations. The Treaty of Versailles punished Germany severely. It took away German territory. New nations were created: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Austria. The Middle East, once controlled by the Ottoman Empire, was divided between Britain and France in a secret agreement called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Once again, lines were drawn by powerful outsiders with little understanding of the people who would live within them. And once again, those lines would lead to more conflict. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916 is one of the most controversial border decisions in history. Controversial means it caused strong disagreement and debate. Mark Sykes was a British diplomat. François-Georges Picot was a French diplomat. Together, they secretly agreed to divide the Arab territories of the Ottoman Empire between Britain and France after the war. They drew a straight line across a map of the Middle East. Everything north of the line went to France. Everything south went to Britain. This line cut through communities that had lived together for centuries. It created Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine as separate political entities. But these were not natural nations with shared identities. They were administrative zones, territories created for the convenience of European colonial powers. The Arab people living in these lands had been promised independence by the British during World War I. In exchange for fighting against the Ottoman Empire, Britain's representative Lawrence of Arabia, the famous British officer T.E. Lawrence, had suggested that Arab independence was possible. That promise was not kept. The borders drawn after World War I created tensions that are still unresolved today. The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. The sectarian conflict in Iraq between Sunni and Shia Muslims. The Syrian civil war. All of these conflicts have deep roots in the artificial borders drawn by European powers a century ago. Before we continue, if this story is helping you learn English, or if you find history fascinating, please take just 1 second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us keep making these stories for you. Now, let's keep going. If World War I broke the old empires, World War II broke the world itself, and then rebuilt it with completely new rules. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime in Germany rejected the borders of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler believed in a concept called Lebensraum. Lebensraum is a German word meaning living space. Hitler argued that the German people needed more territory in Eastern Europe. This idea justified, or tried to justify, the invasion and occupation of neighboring countries. Germany invaded Poland in September 1939. This triggered World War II. Over the next 6 years, borders across Europe were erased and redrawn by military conquest. Nazi Germany occupied France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, Norway, and much of Eastern Europe. Japan occupied vast territories across Asia and the Pacific. When the war ended in 1945 with the defeat of Germany and Japan, the map of the world looked completely different again. Germany itself was divided in half. East Germany was controlled by the Soviet Union. West Germany was controlled by the Western Allies, the United States, Britain, and France. The capital city of Berlin, deep inside East Germany, was also divided into 4 sectors. Poland's borders shifted westward. Millions of ethnic Germans were expelled, forced to leave from Eastern Europe. Japan lost all its overseas territories. Colonial empires began to crack as independence movements grew across Asia and Africa. And at the center of it all, 2 new superpowers emerged. A superpower is a nation with extraordinary military and economic power. The United States and the Soviet Union. Their rivalry would define the next 50 years of border history. The Cold War was not fought with bullets between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was fought with ideology. Ideology is a system of ideas and beliefs about how society should be organized. The United States believed in capitalism and democracy. Capitalism is an economic system where private individuals own businesses and compete in the market. Democracy is a political system where citizens choose their leaders through elections. The Soviet Union believed in communism. Communism is a system where the government controls the economy and aims for equal distribution of resources. These 2 ideologies competed to control the world, and they used borders as their weapons. Germany became the clearest symbol of the divided world. In 1961, the Soviet-backed government of East Germany built a wall through the city of Berlin. The Berlin Wall was 155 kilometers long. It was made of concrete, barbed wire, and guard towers. Its purpose was not to keep enemies out. It was to keep East German citizens in. The Berlin Wall became the most powerful symbol of Cold War division. Families were separated. People risked and lost their lives trying to cross it. The wall said, "On this side, you live under our system. There is no escape." Similar divisions happened around the world. Korea was divided at the 38th parallel, an imaginary horizontal line of latitude. The line created two countries, Communist North Korea and capitalist South Korea. They fought a devastating war from 1950 to 1953. Today, that border is one of the most heavily militarized in the world. Militarized means it has a very large military presence, soldiers, weapons, and barriers. Vietnam was divided. China and Taiwan were divided. The world was split into two camps. And every new border dispute became a battleground for superpower influence. While the Cold War divided the powerful world, something remarkable was happening in the developing world. One by one, colonized nations were demanding their freedom. Decolonization is the process by which colonies gain independence from their colonial rulers. After World War II, this process accelerated rapidly. Accelerated means it moved faster and faster. India and Pakistan gained independence in 1947. Israel declared independence in 1948. Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African nation to gain independence in 1957. By 1975, nearly every former colony had become an independent nation. These new nations faced a fundamental challenge. A fundamental challenge is a basic core problem that affects everything else. The challenge was this: the borders they inherited were colonial borders. They were drawn by outsiders for the benefit of outsiders. But changing those borders would mean more wars, more displacement, and more suffering. So most new nations made a difficult decision. They would keep the colonial borders. They would try to build national identities, new stories, new flags, new languages of government within those inherited lines. Some succeeded remarkably. Countries like Botswana, South Korea, and Singapore built stable, prosperous nations within their inherited territories. Others struggled terribly, torn apart by the ethnic and religious divisions that colonial borders had forced together or cruelly separated. The human cost of this era was enormous. Enormous means extremely large. Millions of people became refugees, people forced to flee their homes because of conflict or persecution. Millions more lived under authoritarian regimes, governments that controlled people's lives through fear and force, that were supported by Cold War superpowers as long as they chose the right ideology. The story of decolonization is both inspiring and heartbreaking at the same time. It is the story of people finally reclaiming the right to exist on their own terms, but often discovering that the land they inherited was already designed to divide them. On the night of November 9th, 1989, something happened that almost no one had predicted. The Berlin Wall fell. East German citizens climbed on top of it. They smashed it with hammers. They danced on its ruins. After 28 years of concrete and barbed wire, the most powerful symbol of Cold War division crumbled in a single night. The fall of the Berlin Wall did not just reunite one city. It triggered a wave of change across the entire communist world. A wave is a powerful force that moves through many places at once. Within 2 years, the Soviet Union itself collapsed. The USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, broke apart into 15 separate independent nations. Countries like Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Georgia, and Kazakhstan suddenly existed as independent states. For the first time in decades, or in some cases, ever. The map of Europe changed overnight. New passports were printed. New flags were raised. New anthems were written. Millions of people woke up one morning as citizens of a country that had not existed the day before. For many, it was a moment of extraordinary joy and liberation. Liberation means freedom from control or oppression. For others, it created deep confusion about identity. Who were they now? What language should they speak? Which history was theirs? The borders had changed. But changing a border does not automatically change the lives of the people inside it. Not every post-Cold War border change was peaceful. The story of Yugoslavia is one of the most tragic examples of what happens when a nation built on forced unity tears itself apart. Yugoslavia was created after World War I. It was a country in southeastern Europe that brought together many different groups: Serbs, Croats, Bosnians, Slovenes, Macedonians, and Albanians. These groups had different religions: Orthodox Christianity, Catholicism, and Islam. They had different languages and different historical memories. For decades, a strong communist leader named Josip Broz Tito held Yugoslavia together through central authority and the suppression of nationalism. Suppression means forcefully stopping something from growing or being expressed. When Tito died in 1980 and communism collapsed, that suppression ended. Old tensions, some centuries old, returned with enormous force. Between 1991 and 2001, Yugoslavia broke apart in a series of brutal wars. Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Macedonia, Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo all fought for their borders. These wars featured ethnic cleansing, a horrifying term for the systematic removal or killing of an ethnic group from a territory. Entire cities were besieged. Ancient towns were destroyed. Approximately 140,000 people died. Millions were displaced. When the wars finally ended, 6 new nations existed where one had stood before. But the borders were still contested. Contested means disputed. Not everyone agrees they are legitimate. Kosovo declared independence from Serbia in 2008. Serbia still does not recognize it. The wounds are not fully healed. Yugoslavia teaches the world a painful lesson. You can force different peoples together inside one border, but you cannot force them to feel that they belong together. You might think that in the modern world, with international law and the United Nations, the era of border drawing by force is over. It is not. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. Annexed means officially taking control of another territory. In 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, attempting to redraw the map of Eastern Europe by military force. For the first time since World War II, the world watched in shock. Millions of Ukrainians fled their homes. Once again, a border became the line between safety and danger, between freedom and occupation. In Asia, China claims almost the entire South China Sea as its territory. This conflicts with the claims of Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan. The South China Sea is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Trillions of dollars of trade pass through it every year. The border dispute there is not just political, it is economic and strategic. The border between India and Pakistan remains one of the most dangerous in the world. Both countries possess nuclear weapons. They have fought 3 major wars. The status of Kashmir, a beautiful mountain region claimed by both nations, remains unresolved after nearly 80 years. And then there are the invisible borders, the walls that do not appear on any map, the socioeconomic borders that divide rich neighborhoods from poor ones within the same city, the cultural borders that separate communities who live side by side but never truly meet. These borders are sometimes the hardest to cross of all. A border is just a line, but what a border represents is something far more complex. A border represents belonging. When you hold a passport, you are holding a document that says, I am from here. This community claims me, and I claim it. That is a powerful feeling. For millions of people who were displaced, forced from their homes, the loss of that feeling is one of the deepest forms of suffering. Think about the Palestinian people. Since 1948, millions of Palestinians have lived as refugees in camps in Lebanon, Jordan, and Gaza, waiting to return to land that is now inside another country's borders. They carry keys to houses that no longer exist. Those keys are symbols of belonging, of a home that was lost when a border was drawn. Think about the Rohingya people of Myanmar. They are a Muslim ethnic minority who were stripped of their citizenship in 1982. Without citizenship, they belong to no country. They are stateless. Stateless means having no legal nationality. No country is officially responsible for them. No passport represents them. In the language of international law, they barely exist. These stories remind us that borders are not neutral. A border drawn by power determines who is recognized as human, who has rights, and who does not. The great moral challenge of our era is learning how to honor borders as tools of stability, while refusing to use them as tools of exclusion and dehumanization. The 21st century is testing the idea of borders in new ways. On one hand, the world is more connected than ever. The Internet does not respect borders. A student in Vietnam watches the same videos as a student in Brazil. A programmer in Nigeria works for a company in San Francisco without leaving home. Climate change. The long-term shift in global temperatures and weather patterns caused by human activity does not stop at any border. Wildfires, floods, and rising sea levels affect all nations equally, regardless of where lines are drawn on a map. On the other hand, many nations are building more walls, not fewer. The United States built barriers along its border with Mexico. Hungary built a fence along its border with Serbia. Saudi Arabia built a wall along its border with Iraq. People around the world are feeling the anxiety that comes with rapid change. Economic uncertainty, cultural shifts, and mass migration. And borders feel like protection. They feel like a way to say, we control what happens here. In 2016, British citizens voted in a referendum, a public vote on a specific question, to leave the European Union. This event was called Brexit. Brexit is a combination of British and exit. The European Union had created a space where 27 nations shared open borders, a common market, and free movement of people. Brexit was a statement that some British people wanted their national border back. They wanted to decide who could enter their country and on what terms. Brexit showed the world that even in peaceful, prosperous democracies, the question of borders is never truly settled. People will always debate the tension between openness and control, between national identity and global community. We began this story with a simple image: lines on a map. Those lines are never just geographical. They carry within them centuries of ambition, violence, negotiation, and hope. They carry the memories of people who were separated, peoples who were conquered, and nations that were born from the courage of those who refused to accept the borders imposed on them. Every border in the world today has a story. Behind every line, there is a war that ended, a treaty that was signed. A people who were promised something, a people who were betrayed, a generation that was forced to rebuild. And yet, despite all the pain that borders have caused, human beings have also shown, again and again, their extraordinary ability to build meaning and community within those lines. People take an inherited territory, even one drawn by strangers with no care for their lives, and they make it home. They fill it with language, music, food, memory, and love. They turn a line on a map into a place of belonging. That is perhaps the most resilient thing about human beings. Resilient means able to recover from difficulty and adapt to new conditions. We can be divided. We can be displaced. We can lose everything that defined us. But we always, somehow, eventually, find our way back to each other. We find new ways to belong. The lines on the map may divide the land, but they have never divided the human spirit.